All right, good day, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Calmly Considered here on Faith Seeking Understanding. I am Allan Bevere, and I am a pastor, retired professor, Bible moth, theologian in exile, and peddler of hope. And I am the self-appointed Anselm of Canterbury Chair of Podcast Theology and Culture, Faith Seeking Understanding University, a completely made-up university, but where all are invited to ponder profound things free of charge. And my conversation partner, as always, is the incomparable, and he has the fingerprints to prove it, Michael Cruz, who is the Grand Poobah Chair here of Economics and Public Theology. And Michael, good to see you. How you doing?
You're very good, Allan. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. We're coming to the end here pretty quickly. And
yeah, we are.
Yeah, and that's part of the topic of our conversation today. We're going to review 2022 for a little while, and then we're going to talk about, we'll prognosticate for 2023, and maybe we can revisit that maybe next year and see all the places where we were wrong. But it's fun to do that. So anyway, yeah, 2022. I got to tell you, 2022. I was thinking the other day that it just didn't seem all that long ago that we were wondering at this time of the year in 1999 about Y2K.
Yes, right.
Right, 22 years ago, and man, boy, has time just zipped by, hasn't it?
That's right.
I mean, wow. And
children have been born and gone through college by now.
Yeah, no kidding. No, absolutely no kidding. And had no clue about Y2K or anything else. It's just, it's interesting how, the old adage, I tell people the old adage, time flies when you're having fun, must be true, because I've been having fun. So it seems like 60 years has gone pretty quick anyway. But here we are at the end of 2022. So let's have some conversation about that. I'd like to start briefly. Every year at the end of this time, we all remember, and the news shows put on all the famous people we've lost in 2022. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but I thought maybe you and I could talk about at least one person important to us that we lost that made an impact. So I wanted to start and talk about, of course, we lost some good biblical scholars and theologians this year, but I wanted to highlight Ed Sanders, E.P. Sanders. Who died. And he wrote many books, but the book that changed the conversation on Paul in the late 70s was his book, Paul and Palestinian Judaism. And I remember when I was a young seminarian, hadn't read the book in its entirety, but I poked in it because, you had papers to do for class. And so I did poke through it and read certain sections. But then when I started my PhD and I was working in Paul, I knew immediately that I would have to read Sanders, and read his, 500-page book or whatever it was. I can't remember what it was. But he really changed the direction of Pauline studies. And, people who haven't read Sanders, but have read, my doctoral advisor, Jimmy Dunn, or Tom Wright, or Richard Hayes, and others, these are all people that were writing while looking in the rearview mirror and seeing Ed Sanders,
right, exactly.
So he was quite the formidable figure as far as Pauline studies, and just wanted to mention that it's too bad to see him come to his time. When I was in seminary, working on my master's degrees in my 20s and then working on my doctorate in my early 30s, a lot of the scholars that I was cutting my teeth on, who were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, they're all starting to pass from the scene now.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So it just is kind of sobering, although thank God there's good scholars now that are coming up and that are making their mark, but it just is a reminder of again, that time just moves on. So anyway, so Ed Sanders, that's who I wanted to lift up. Do you have anybody we need to mention?
I can't think of, I hadn't really thought in that line in terms of people who passed this year, and nothing is immediately popping into my head. It's interesting you bring up Sanders. I think my first exposure to some of the Pauline stuff was probably through N.T. Wright, in his writing, and it was through him reading his footnotes and learning more about that whole thing that then took me back to Sanders to read some of Sanders. So
Yeah.
that, and you can really see the brilliance of a mind that was really putting things together in a helpful way that people had not seen before. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. 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 He made quite an impact. Didn't make a lot of the Lutherans happy. But
Well,
you know. Anyway, so all right. Well, so let's let's just kind of have at 2022 with some things. So I think to start the conversation, I think we've got to recognize the significance of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, right.
I remember before that happened, you and I having conversation about the economy, and you had made
Right.
predictions about inflation and other things that was going to settle down, and then Putin invaded Ukraine, and that really made a difference, didn't it? It made a difference in several different ways. You want to comment on that for a little bit?
Well, I mean, yes, obviously that was the big thing. We're coming out of COVID, supply chains were disrupted, and the natural thing of the economy heating back up after you open the economy back up was going to cause inflation. That was all pretty much baked in. I think there were I think there's probably at least three things involved with that. One is just sorting out the supply chains, which you just mentioned, that issue. I think there was also the responsibility of the Federal Reserve Bank in terms of managing interest rates.
Yeah.
And most economists that I know, that I respect, that I read a lot of, suggest that the Federal Reserve was slow to react. And so that may have exacerbated things a little bit. But certainly the big shock to the system was what happened with Russia and Ukraine. And that has disrupted energy and supply chains and all that type of thing, which has not helped inflation. I will say, though, that inflation has been coming down. Even in the midst of this, inflation has been coming down. It is improving. The Fed keeps tightening the rates. They talk about back in the early 1980s, when we had the recession after 1980, that looking back at that, many economists praised the Fed at that point for having done what they did, was that they were just relentless in trying to get inflation stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And they were willing to suffer a significant recession in order to get that under control. And a lot of them look back and say that was probably the right thing to do. And that's probably what needs to happen here, is that even if it risks a recession, although I'm not sure it will be a significant recession, that getting the inflation back down to that, certainly under 3%, hopefully around 2%, is I think what they're aiming for. But the Russia thing, I mean, it's been disruptive, but we still are seeing some improvement. I think it's still, again, barring another major upheaval of some kind like that, I still think by the middle of next year, into next year, you're probably down to inflation like 3% or something like that. That's still a little above what we have experienced most of recent years, but it's a much more tolerable, manageable rate.
Yeah. Yeah. So that brings up two thoughts, as you mentioned it. The first is markets just adjust, don't they, over time?
Yeah, right.
I mean, they do. I mean, we can talk about, markets adjust. So, we get all, it's not like, but I can remember when gas went up. I remember when gas went up over $1 a gallon, right?
Right.
I mean, I do remember that. And,
right.
we're all complaining and every blah, 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 blah. Understandable. It's understandable. And, but then we adjust. And then it goes up, we get high, it goes up to 170, and we adjust. The markets do the same thing. People, the people involved in generating wealth want to make money, and everybody else wants to be able to benefit. So we just learn how to figure this out over time, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. Just as a funny little footnote, I was watching saw Home Alone. I think it was Home Alone that I was watching, and in a brief picture, there's a picture of a gasoline station that had the price of gas up on the sign. It was like 75 cents.
Yeah.
And I figured that in today's dollars, that would be $2 a gallon.
Yeah.
So, gasoline's
well, that's about where we are. It's about where we are. It's where it is. Yeah.
A little bit more, but
that's interesting. Yeah.
So it's not like the gas prices are totally, outside the realm of past experience. And inflation is high, and they don't want to minimize the suffering, the challenges that it presents for people, but it is not. The system will adjust, and I don't think this is outside what we've experienced in the past. We just wish it would happen quicker. And
Yes,
the
yeah.
war with Russia is not helping.
It's tough. It's tough in the short term. I mean, when you try to,
Right.
it's we can talk big picture, and that's important. But then, if you're a family trying to put food on the table,
Exactly.
small comfort, right? Because right
Yeah.
now is when you're feeling it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing that you said that made me think about it again is that the economy is a trade-off. You talked about back in the 70s, the Fed's fighting inflation, willing to allow for a recession to happen.
You're right.
And it's just almost that, there's always the good news and bad news in the economy. So,
Right.
so when inflation, and I can, I remember as a young guy reading and just cutting my teeth on economics. I remember conservative George Will arguing that inflation was essentially a tax on the poor. And that when we talked about taxes and who should pay or who shouldn't, that if we let inflation get out of hand, the people who will suffer the most are the people who can least afford it.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
so to keep at that and keep that down is an important thing.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Very good. So, and the other thing is, so I read an article the other day that said, and I should have written it down. I don't remember who wrote it, but basically, the article, speaking of Putin in Ukraine, the article was, it's been a bad year for authoritarians.
Yeah. Right.
Now, in some ways, I do agree with that. Putin's war is not going well. We had our last election, and all of our authoritarian candidates, Donald Trump, for example,
Right.
lost because a lot of their endorsements, a lot of people they recommended, and all of the people who were more election deniers didn't win, although a lot of those elections were close.
Right.
Said it was a bad year for authoritarians. I'm inclined to agree with that, but I can't say that I'm still yet completely comforted, Michael.
No, I agree. But there's also in Brazil, the right-wing candidate in Brazil lost the election there to left-wing candidate. You also have the rising protests in Iran against the authoritarians there, and you have China had some of the biggest protests it's had in 30 years. So I mean, there are signs that there is a desire for democracy, but I agree with you. I think that we may have at least halted or slightly turned a corner against some of this authoritarian stuff, but it's not over, and it's not going to be over for the rest of your life and my life.
Yeah.
Because the world is continuing to change, and as long as people feel like they're losing their grip on society and culture, the people that have been in dominant positions in those societies, as long as they feel like they're losing that, authoritarianism is always going to be an attractive alternative to try to stem that loss.
Yeah, and, which will be covered all in the name of freedom, right?
Exactly.
So I mean, nobody says I'm an authoritarian, and nobody says I want to vote for authoritarian, but they're able to use cover language to justify it in the name of freedom and that kind of thing. I always like to tell the story, Michael, when you talked about this and the attractiveness to authoritarianism when things aren't going the way you want, is that Robert McNamara, who was John F. Kennedy's Secretary of Defense, back in the 60s, they had a conference. They were having the cabinet was having a conversation one day, apparently, about how to work on encouraging democracy in the Southern Hemisphere. What can we do? And McNamara's point is, he says, well, basically, if you want to encourage democracy, you need to free up the economies because if people have to choose between a little more freedom and a brand new car, they probably would take the car.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah.
So what you want to do is free up the economy, and then they'll desire more democracy.
There you go. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So so the old adage, we vote our pocketbooks, tends to be true, isn't it?
Yeah, there is some truth to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So what strikes you about 2022 that was important?
Well, I think there are a number of things. Those are sort of, to me, relatively shorter term considerations. What's going to happen with inflation? That will change within months. The war may drag on for a little bit. I'm a little concerned about the staying power of Europe and the United States. How long and how much are they going to stay invested? I think it's important that Ukraine does regain its territory and its sovereignty and becomes a sovereign nation. And I'm still have questions about how committed we are to that. The other side is we don't know how this ends. I don't see a clear ending to this as to how you get this. Even if Putin were to somehow leave power, were replaced, that doesn't necessarily mean he'd be replaced by somebody who's any less, to the extreme than he is, but based on the people that are in leadership in Russia. So I think that's a big question mark on the future in terms of geopolitical stuff. But I think the other side of this is the part as we've been thinking about this topic since we talked about making this our theme, was if we look at the continuous process, which is the stuff we never see because the news always talks about the negative stuff, the thing of the moment, the big item of what happened today, versus seeing things in longer trajectories and seeing the stuff that's progressively happening over time that we don't see daily indications of, but continues to improve. And I think about things like the mRNA vaccine that was developed for COVID, and its application to all sorts of viruses and even cancer. The pharmaceutical companies are feeling very optimistic about being able to make major, and already are. I mean, the test results from some of these things are showing remarkable abilities to defeat various types of diseases. We talk about, still the increasing, the improvement in child survival. Child mortality is still falling all around the world. There are minor setbacks here and there in places around the world, but the overall quality of life for people continues to improve around the world.
Yeah,
I think about things like, it seems right now, it may seem just a footnote, but the news about fusion, the nuclear fusion test, we're not going to see anything practically from that for years. It may not be significant in years of my lifetime. I suspect by the time our children, certainly our grandchildren, in their lifetimes, we talk about what happened with the internal combustion engine. If you can harness fusion energy, we are talking about something that dwarfs whatever happened with the internal combustion engine in terms of cheap, non-polluting, non-carbon causing energy production. And that would just be such a game changer across the world in terms of improving people's well-being and their livelihoods. I think of things like the James Webb Space Telescope.
Yeah.
Being able to see deep in space and what we're learning about life and science. And I guess my basic point is there is so much good that is happening, so many interesting things. I keep telling people occasionally, I'm approaching 65, and I said I've got maybe a couple decades if I'm lucky, left based on life expectancy tables. I said my biggest frustration and disappointment is I'm not going to live long enough to see all this stuff.
Yeah. Isn't it great? So
excitement, all this stuff is coming about. I'm just going to miss it.
It's great. You and I get to see things our grandparents didn't get to see, but our grandchildren will get to see things we won't. And and you are right. I actually had the James Webb Telescope on my list to talk about. But there have been, and one of the things. I guess one of the things, if I give advice for people in a new year, we'll get to that in a little bit,
right,
is just watch less news.
Yes.
And particularly don't watch the evening talking heads.
Yes.
I don't care what cable news channel you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Okay, name them all, doesn't matter. Right. Because if you really want to get a jaded understanding of reality and be depressed and always be angry, first of all.
Right.
Because basically the talking heads on the evening cable news shows are peddlers of outrage. Their task is to gin up their base and make them angry so they'll come back for more anger the next night.
Right.
If you really want to bring yourself some wholeness, get the headlines, be informed, but just leave it alone and focus on some of this other stuff, the just amazing things that are happening. Epidemiology, vaccine science is like one of the greatest things since sliced bread, because just think of the diseases we have virtually eliminated. Yeah. And so, I sometimes want to pull my hair out at these anti-vaxxers because they do not understand, what the way this works, or they don't want to understand. It's amazing to me, as to You know, I mean, I've had my flu shot, I had my COVID booster, I got my I got something else. I don't remember.
I've had my shingles vaccine.
I got the shingles. I mean, if it's a vaccine, I get it. And I just think it's been amazing. I don't think, you know, I think sometimes the problem is it's like the fish in the fishbowl doesn't realize how great the water is. You know, we live in this time and we don't realize how great it is, you know, with the problems we have, and we got problems.
Yeah.
But how great it is to live in a day when you don't have to worry about smallpox, for example.
Yeah. Right.
It's just been, you know, there were, and measles, even though we had about 20 cases in Ohio recently because, again, of parents not getting their children vaccinated. But it's just an amazing thing, and you're right to highlight that, and we need to make sure about that. The other thing is in reference to Europe and talking about NATO and the Europe alliance. I mean, I really am one of these guys who believes that the NATO alliance has also been a great thing. I think, I think after the Second World War, after it was over, you know, tip your hat off to the United States for having the vision to say, you know, the Marshall Plan, to say, you know what, we didn't start this, but we need to rebuild Europe. It's in our best interest to rebuild Europe. It's in our best interest to forge those alliances. I mean, that was a real game changer.
Yeah.
You know, what would the world be like today had we decided not to do that? If we had been isolationist and said, you know what, that whole thing is their problem. We're going to let them sort it out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, and the whole NATO alliance has been great. And I do worry a little bit about it. Now, I do want to say, I almost hate to say this because I have to give some credit to Donald Trump here, which is really tough for me. But I do think he was right in bringing out that European nations need to pay their fair share of this alliance.
Right.
They have not done so. And I don't think the answer is to just get rid of it, because I think that would be worse. But I do want to say to our European neighbors, you know, we've come to your aid and we're glad to come to your aid because we're all in this together. But you got to pony up as to what, you know, whatever the formula is, something of GDP or whatever it is. You got to pony up on this. And I really wish they would do that. I'm a little frustrated that they don't see that as a serious thing, or many of them. I don't want to accuse all of them of that.
Sure. Varies. Well, I think there's a natural human process that develops here. Going back to the technology story for just a second, if we were to suddenly get fusion energy, and we got it, say, 10 years from now, within 25 years after getting that fusion energy, you would have people already that would have forgotten what a tremendous leap it was to get fusion energy, and fusion energy would just be a part of what we do every day, and then be on to the next thing about what's terrible with the world and, you know, what's falling. So no matter what advancement you make, there's a tendency that once it becomes ingrained and it's there, it loses all of its sense of awe or sense of what an accomplishment that it was. I think the same is true with political freedom. I think we don't appreciate what a relatively novel and new thing, the level of political freedom and structure of institutions that creates flourishing in societies. I don't think that we have an appreciation of that, appreciation of how new that is in human history. And so I think that what happens is that you have Europe, and you haven't had a significant war, significant tensions in Europe for 30 years, and you have a whole generation that's grown up without seeing that, and then you begin to get this perspective that we really don't have to invest anything in keeping this thing going. And the only way that democracy and freedom continue is that you have to keep consciously focusing on its creation. New threats, new ideologies emerge that attempt to try to supplant that kind of freedom, to destroy things. I think that's you'd see people like Putin and some other autocrats who have no love for each other, aren't necessarily interested in helping each other's ambitions in terms of what they're trying to accomplish in their own countries. But what they do have in common is they see world orders in terms of where groups like NATO, the unity of nations that are for democracy, that is a threat to them in each of their individual projects. And so they tend to be united about trying to undercut and destroy systems of accountability, both in their country and internationally. And
Yeah.
so I think that that is what we will continue to see. And there needs to be a movement, an international movement, that I think has a clear vision that that cannot be allowed to happen. That democracy, freedom, liberal society is the way forward, with all of its imperfections and all the issues. We need to keep working on how do we improve and how can we make it more just. But it is certainly far preferable to all the other options. Certainly the authoritarianism of these leaders. So I guess that's kind of where I think about some of these issues. And NATO, I think you're probably right. Probably got complacent. Probably got we're past the era where anybody would ever try to do something like Putin did, and then wham, suddenly we realize democracy is more fragile than we thought. So,
and that there are, and wherever there's always power and money and ambition, there will always be people wanting to take advantage of things. The Bible, one thing that strikes me about the Bible is that when the God's people are warned not to forget God or the covenant, it's when things are good.
Yes.
It's never when things are rotten. We tend to think, well, people don't believe in God or they reject God when things are bad, and that's true. But there are more people become complacent, and forget. And one of the things that I have felt for a while is that the current decline of the church in America, among other reasons, is that we've become a victim of our own success, and so that people are just complacent about it. And so it is something to keep in mind.
Can I add one thing right there? I remember hearing one time, I'm trying to remember the name of the woman. It'll come to me in a minute, hopefully. Anyway, they looking at survey data over what's happened with denominations. This was particularly focused on mainline denominations because I was part of Presbyterian Church USA. It was a PCUSA crowd that she was talking to. But one of the things I thought was interesting, she pointed out, you go back 100, 150 years ago, it was churches and then later sort of parachurch organizations that were the ones that were the development for all of these various outreaches to people, home for unwed mothers, soup kitchens, recover, what do you call it, support groups for various people going through various types of things. So churches tended to be the ones who birthed all of these things. And then what happened is they became birthed and became widely disseminated throughout society. They sort of ceased to then be connected with explicitly religious institutions, and sometimes either government or non-religious entities sort of incorporated that into how society works. And part of the problem, I should say problem, how do I say this? One of the challenges that has, I think, developed for the church is as quality of life has improved in so many different ways, what is the role of the church in terms of how it's supposed to engage the world?
Right.
I mean, basically, when you successfully created all these institutions and organizations that effectively address some of the worst problems that ever existed for humanity, once that has done and that's become part of the norm of what society is, well, what's our role now? And it just feels to me, I don't know if you feel the same way, but I sort of feel like the church is looking for what is our response to this world today. This is who we were. This was so much a part of our identity, how we did this.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're looking forward and saying, okay, what's our relevance to anybody?
I do think that's happening. I also think that you have got, and again, I don't know how to say this, but you've got a generation of older persons for whom the church was different when they were young. And right now, their number one, and I can tell you because I've talked to people about this. This is not true of everybody. I want to be careful here.
Right.
Because I think there are a lot of older folks who would like to see, they're concerned. But I think for a lot of people too, it's just, I want to make sure my church is open when I die, because I want to have my funeral here.
I want them to bury me. Yeah.
And that's not exactly a missional perspective.
That's right.
But at the same time, again, you've got younger people who are sort of in the same boat, and it's really hard. I mean, the younger generation too. The other thing is some of the shifts on beliefs about certain issues and other things. The younger generation just doesn't they have concerns that, let's be honest, that we boomers didn't when we were in the heyday. It's like somebody said to me the other day about, dissing organ music and other kinds of traditional music. And I said, you're a boomer. I said, you are from the boomer generation. The fact is, these younger people that I know, it's not that they have rejected a more contemporary Christian sound. It's just that they're now more open to traditional expressions of worship because they feel like they grew up in a world that was unmoored, including Christianity, in which you get, like a lot of independent Protestant churches, where worship is, 12 songs about me and Jesus and therapy, and an inspirational sermon telling you to, be productive or how to make it through your day. And these younger folks feel like there's something greater that they have. And so they're more open to traditional expressions. And so, so the boomers, as we get older, we complain, but, whatever.
Boomers complaining? Shocking.
Boomers complaining, yeah. Right. Boomers are. I always said that you could always tell a boomer is when you ask people from different generations to raise their hand, and you ask boomers to raise their hand, they go, "Yeah, I'm a boomer. You want to make something of it?"
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. Well, let's go back a little bit to science, because the James Hubble telescope. I mean, the sights have just amazed me. And the thing that two things that amaze me. The first always is that when you look at these kinds of pictures, you realize you're seeing a tiny slice of the entire universe, really infinitesimal size, right? If it was a piece of pie, you wouldn't even be able to find it, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
But not only that, you're seeing the universe as it was. That if somehow you could now turn a camera back on that same spot and get an instant picture, it would be vastly different. Yeah. It just blows my mind.
Yeah. What's the Doctor Who thing? It's a wibbly wobbly, timey wimey thing. It's I look at it and just that is literally, in the truest sense of the word, awe inspiring. Yeah. I mean, just the awe of how massive and incomprehensible the universe is. And that, I think, in that sense, I think it's the pictures that we've been able to see with that telescope, to me, just increase my sense of awe and mystery and wonder about the world. I don't understand all the science that they're able to determine from what they're seeing through that. That's interesting as well too. Obviously, the main reason for them putting it there, but just also the spiritual experience that is evoked by looking at those images is just amazing. Yeah.
And it again, it's also a reminder that, and I think it's good, because I think we're hopefully finally getting past the modernist idea or the Enlightenment idea that really undermines any sense of mystery. That the only thing that's important is what we can know.
Right.
And of course, Christianity in its best form has never, in fact, Christianity in its best form has always started out with mystery. We don't deny we need to talk about the mystery, but we acknowledge that it's mystery. And there's a lot of kind of interesting things taking place that in the world of science that are reinforcing to me that connection between what we know and the mysterious. I've been reading a lot of late on neuroscience, and again, I like astronomy. I read it. There's a lot of it I don't quite get, but I read it because it's interesting to me. And just what we're learning. I've been reading on the senses, and neurobiologists are saying, we got 5 senses. No, we don't. We got more than that. And they talk about these folks who they're rare. But, they were interviewing a guy that they have done tests on who basically hears color. He hears it. I mean, he hears color, right? I mean, I used to like to say that when I drink too much caffeine, I see noises. Well, there are people who see noises. And so, I mean, and again, I can't explain all of this stuff. Right. But what they're saying is that our bodies, our brains are interconnected with reality.
Right.
in a way that we just can no longer separate. That with the old separation between me and the reality around me is just not possible.
Yeah.
And so I watch this stuff and I listen to this stuff, and it just absolutely astounds me. And I begin to think to myself, my gosh, when those ancient folks, those ancient theologians talked about mystery, they sure didn't know things we know now, but my gosh, they were onto something, weren't they?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. There's a book, I think it's called How Not to Speak of God. I think
Yeah.
Peter Roll, I don't know if you've read that little book. I just love his point that what we read in scripture and what we know through the tradition is it may be a revelation from God. It tells us aspects and gives us little tiny windows into aspects of God. But when we go on to try to limit God to what we have seen in just that little revelation,
Yeah.
we are speaking beyond what we know.
Yeah.
And God is so much vastly more complex. He talks about you can talk about infinity being, there's numbers going from 0 to whatever. But if you talk about in between any two numbers, in between 1 and 2, there are also an infinite set of numbers in between 1 and 2. So 1 and 2 can set a boundary, but in between that, there is also an infinity. So we have some limits that God has given us to sort of give a sense of who God is. But even within those limits, there is such a vastness and mystery even with what we know of God, that we cannot fully comprehend who God is. And I think and you go back, this cycles back to what you're saying earlier about boomers and worship. We turned it into such a therapeutic, how do I feel good this week type experience, that what is lost in all of that is just that grand sense of mystery, this story that is just so far beyond us. And how do we express our awe, and how do we express our gratefulness within that world?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of apathetic theology, which talks about God in negative terms, meaning you don't say that God is omnipotent, because who in God's green earth understands what it means to be omnipotent, right?
Yeah.
And so when you start saying what omnipotent means, you get yourself in trouble real quick if you're talking about God. So what you instead say, God is not limited like we are.
Right.
God is, you don't say God is omniscient, all-knowing. You say God is not ignorant like we are. And we try to be real careful not to go into too much defining, because as St. Augustine warns us, that if you're not careful in talking about God, you could be talking about less than God. And then once you do that, you're committing idolatry.
Yeah.
And so we need to be really careful about that in reference to God. And, Jesus, one of the things that I say to my students when I teach on Christology is that the conviction of the Christian faith is that Jesus reveals God decisively, not exhaustively.
Yes,
Jesus doesn't reveal every single thing there is to know about God. But what Jesus does is reveal God in a definitive way where we can't get that revelation anywhere else. And so I think maybe we're best to try to stick with talking about God as revealed to us in Jesus and leave everything else alone. Possibly.
There you go. Right.
Just a thought. Just a thought. All right. Well, let's move on to what's coming up. 2023 is coming up. Michael, you think Ron DeSantis will run for president?
Probably. I suspect he will. I think there could be other Republicans that will get into the mix. It's still a big question mark for me what happens with Trump and his most fervent supporters, and how many of those supporters stay fervent supporters. I am thoroughly convinced he's not going away. He will be here in 2024, whether he's running for president or not. He will be a voice, and he will have people that are behind him. And so no matter if he's not the nominee to become president, whoever is the nominee for the Republican Party is not only going to be fighting Democrats, they're going to be fighting Donald Trump and his base. Is almost, I think, what's certain to happen. So it will be an interesting, messy thing to see what happens. I have no predictions as to how all that plays out, but I think we're witnessing the slow meltdown of a political party, and I don't know exactly how that's going to manifest itself.
Michael, I'll say this again. I've said it in previous shows that we've done together. I've been a swing voter all my life. I have, for president, I probably voted more often for Republicans than Democrats.
Yeah.
I do not know what has happened to the Republican Party.
Yeah.
It is just, I don't speak as some lefty liberal, right?
Yeah. Right.
I speak as someone who has voted for Republicans. I just am mystified. I mean, I know the reasons, we can talk about it, but it's
Right.
There's still this shock value is what has happened to the grand old party.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
It's astounding to me.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't know how this resolves itself. I don't
either.
have a crystal ball. I can't see exactly how it ends up. So yeah, I think that's going to be there. I saw a graph sometime recently that showed public opinion views on various of the hot button culture war issues going back for the past 20 years, and every single one of them, whether you're talking about things like abortion, you're talking about same-sex marriage, legalization of drugs, a whole list of things, every one of them was trending away from the conservative viewpoint in terms of what most of these conservative Republicans believe, and yet they are making the centerpiece of their political involvement all about wokeness and about fighting things like that will limit climate change. That's their that's the message that they want to put forward.
Yeah, they really are becoming a seriously true minority party, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been one of those believers that the idea is that in a healthy democracy, you've got to have a vibrant conservatism and a vibrant liberalism. It doesn't mean you have to embrace them both.
Right.
But we need to say that when you've got a healthy, vibrant conservatism and a healthy, vibrant liberalism, and you have people willing to have conversation across the aisle, that's democracy at its best, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And we just don't have that. And by the way, let me say, I'm not so sure there's, liberals right now. I mean, there's some people on the as I affectionately like to call the extremes, the loony left and the wacky right. There are people on the loony left that just, I say to myself, because right now, see, the difference is the wacky right has too much of a platform because of Donald Trump. The loony left doesn't have that kind of platform.
Exactly.
But if the loony left got that kind of platform, it would be the same stuff, except that it would be different issues, I suppose, or different things.
And they are there, and they
are there. So you always have the loons and the wackos. The key is to marginalize them, and keep them out of significant power.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Right. That's the key.
Right.
And right now, the wacky right's got this platform with Trump, and that's the problem, it seems to me. Yeah. So do you think Biden runs again, or does he decide to bow out?
I think he'll run again.
Yeah.
And
so do I.
I think the Democrat, I think I'm in a minority. I know I have friends that are pretty solid Democrats, and at least then coming up to the midterms and shortly thereafter, they were all like, "Oh, we can't have Biden running for president. We'll never, win as president." I still keep watching this, and I think people continually underestimate him, and I don't think they appreciate his, how do I say, the way that he works with the government and the way that he works with people. His style of getting things done is very quiet. It's behind the scenes. It's very personal and relational, and it's not the big splash, the big public, the grand, Rambo style. We're gonna, take this problem and fix it. That's what he does behind the scenes. And I think a lot of people who are, in his camp in terms of the policy issues, and even more liberal, I think continually underestimate how effective he is. I think he's been very effective. And I think he has understood where those swing voters and those independent voters, where they are, and what speaks to them, and what's going to motivate them to vote for Democrats. So I think I think he'd be a good candidate for the Democrats if they decide to run. I can't think of anybody else in the Democratic Party right now that I would see as a good solid contender against him.
Yeah.
The midterm elections, whether I agree with all the stuff that he accomplished in terms of each of the bills that got passed, He was very successful at passing very difficult, complex bills that had lots of stuff that the opposition wouldn't want. I mean, he was very, very adept at doing that. I'll be curious to see what happens, when Republicans take control of the House and how that plays out. But yeah, I think he'll run, and I think he probably will.
And let's make real clear what we're saying here, because we've got some listeners who are seething right now. We're not saying we're not necessarily saying we agree with everything President Biden has done. What we're saying is he's been effective at doing it.
Yeah,
and he's accomplished. It's like Nancy Pelosi. There's no one who can say she's not been one of the most effective speakers in recent history.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you agree with everything she accomplished or what she did, but when it comes to fulfilling the job description for Speaker in the House, Speaker of the House, she did a good job. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that's the point. The point is, do they live up to the job description? And Biden has, whether and he's done some things that I disagree with, certainly.
Yeah, sure.
But we need to say that. So I agree. I think he runs. So your perspective that inflation is going to continue to come down in 2023?
I think so. I'll go out on a limb and say that I think by the end of next year, inflation will be 3% or less.
Okay. So, what about unemployment?
Unemployment, I don't expect will spike in any particular big way. I don't know exactly what it will be. It may not be down to those historic lows of 3.5%, but I suspect it would certainly be under 5% by the end of the year, even with a recession.
Why is there a worker shortage with lower unemployment?
Yeah. So why is there a worker shortage with lower unemployment? I think the challenge is that you have to be unemployed, you have to be looking for a job.
Right.
Okay. So when they ask the questions about, when I ask questions to people for these surveys, if you're not looking for a job, you're not unemployed. There are people that are not working, that are not unemployed, so to speak, because they're not looking for a job. As the job market becomes more attractive, in whatever way it becomes attractive to people, and that draws people to say, hey, I would like to get a job, then they become part of the unemployed, even though the economy is growing. So you can have employment growing as well as the economy growing at the same time, because you're pulling in more people who haven't worked in the past. I think there's a number of reasons. I'll just put cards on the table here. I think one of the reasons we're having a challenge is our immigration policies. Yeah. I think that we do not have, we have kept so many people out through COVID times, and then the unwillingness to allow people to immigrate here or to create work visas for people to be able to come across the border, work for a time, go back home, that kind of thing. I think that would definitely improve our issue with finding labor for jobs. Yeah. I think there's a number of complex things that are going on. It's going to take a while for it to sort out, but the economy, the last couple years, we had the economy collapse, not because there was a collapse in demand, but because there was a collapse in supply. And I think that's a very unusual circumstance. And I think what you're seeing now is the economy trying to rebalance and readjust, and it's going to take a matter of years. I mean, not 20 years, but 3 or 4 years for that to eventually, I think, refine its footing to be solid again. Yeah. I don't think from what I can tell, I don't think unemployment will be a major issue, even if we have a recession. And based on what I read, if there is a recession, I don't think it will be a severe recession. Okay. So, that's
a couple of thoughts on that first. And again, this is anecdotal, so it's not. But people like to say, well, no one wants to work anymore. It's like as if like I don't want to work anymore, but these people have to eat. Seriously.
Right.
I mean, come on, stop it, right? I know people. I've known some people who prior to COVID were 2-income families, and the wife ended up having to stay home, and you know what they said? We're getting by okay.
Yeah, right.
And so they said, she said, I don't want to go back to work. So you got people who just said, we thought we needed these 2 incomes, but we actually don't. When push came to shove, it would be nice to have the extra income. But we had to tighten our belts, and it worked, and we did it. Now I get more time with the kids, and there's less stress, and
Sure.
I mean, so I think we need to be careful about coming up with one reason. Second thing, in reference to immigration, one of the things now that I'm doing in my retirement is I've actually starting to get connected to the Evangelical Immigration Table, which is concerned about immigrants and immigration, and writing for them and doing things like that. I'm hoping in 2023 to get to the border, because I want to need to see what's going on there. But there's no doubt lack of immigration is a problem. And I can tell you, for example, in Ohio, farmers need workers.
Yes.
They need, and it's not just Ohio, but I'm familiar with Ohio. They need workers and would love to hire some of these asylum seekers. So instead of certain governors in the South sending asylum seekers to the vice president's house, what they really should do is call up the governor of Ohio, who's actually a Republican, and say, I hear you got some farmers that could use some labor. Right. I mean, if they really want to help solve the problem, because yes, the border is strained. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt that these towns are under strain. I get that. I don't deny that. But they could really work to solve the problem. But of course, if they solve the problem, then how could they go out for re-election and tell their constituents, you need to vote for me, because if I don't win, the Huns will invade, right? So one of the things that just I hate about modern politics is that there are politicians who they're so focused on their re-election, they don't want to solve some of these problems. They want to highlight them. So you got to keep voting for me, which just drives me up the wall. But you're exactly right. Part of the labor shortage is due to the fact that our immigrants who are here on visas, work visas, or whatever, are at an all-time low. That's what it is. So anyway,
not going too far down that rabbit hole, if we had a better developed worker visa program that would be informed, we would have far less illegal immigration happening. Ironically, if you had a little bit more porous border that allowed freedom for people to move with these visas, you'd have less need for all the border control that you have, which means the border control you do have would be able to focus on those cases that truly are a problem.
Exactly right.
We have tried to shut the border down from all immigration from anywhere, everywhere, for any reason. Is what it feels like. I'm exaggerating some, but it feels that way. It only exacerbates the problem, because people aren't going to quit trying to come to America, no matter how much we close the borders and try to close the borders. So, so the issue is how can you organize it in a way that maximizes everything, all the various concerns, but neither the Democrats or the Republicans have much of an incentive for getting
political
football.
We're going after Republicans because right now they're the ones in charge, but Democrats really haven't come up with any. There have been plans for comprehensive immigration reform, but as you well remember, during George W. Bush's presidency, he tried to put that through because he understood that you needed comprehensive immigration reform, and he couldn't get it through. By not only people in his own party, but by some Democrats, and because the politics is always there. The Republicans, we can't do this. It's unpopular with our base. Democrats, we can't do this because we don't want to give a Republican president a victory. And so it's just maddening anyway. Well,
so I will predict we will not resolve the immigration problem in the next 2 years.
I predict it as well, unfortunately, and sadly, human lives are at stake on that, right? And so anyway, well, we won't solve that. Anything else about 2023 coming up you think we should mention?
I don't know about specific issues along those lines. I will predict that generally human well-being will continue to improve in the world, that most of the developments that affect our lives in terms of disease, in terms of people not being hungry, in terms of education, that if you look globally around the world, that mostly what you're going to see is improvement. Not the world getting worse. It's getting better.
So like we said, don't watch less news, right? That's what we need to do. So let's get on to the really big stuff for 2023. Who's going to win the Super Bowl, Michael?
Well, of course, the Chiefs will win the Super Bowl. That's a foregone conclusion. But yes, right. No, I don't know. It'll be fun. It'll be interesting to see. I have hopes for my Chiefs. They continually give me heart attacks over and over again. They keep seeming to play at the level of whoever they're playing. Plus, but just a little bit better, just enough to beat them every time.
Just enough to win.
But not enough to go in and really go in and beat some of these teams. So anyway, it'll be fun to watch. It's fun to see some of the new quarterbacks on some of the teams and seeing them emerge. We've particularly been we've been sort of closet 49ers fans over the past 3 or 4 weeks because Brock Purdy is the quarterback for the 49ers. He's an Iowa State guy. My wife's an Iowa Stater. So we have to we don't watch the 49ers, we watch Brock Purdy.
I have to confess, even though I don't follow football anymore, at least at the moment, that I've been interested in watching Baker Mayfield. Who had a pretty good game against the with the Rams. So anyway,
he's up his stock. And then baseball. We keep following the Royals news every day. We still aren't seeing much in terms of big trades or getting the people on, but we have a whole new manager and coaches and so on. They got rid of Matheny, and so they brought a whole new team, pitching coaches, batting coaches, everything. So it does seem to be, based on the personnel they had last year, that should have been a much better team than it was. And that makes you wonder if it doesn't have something to do with the management of the team, the leadership of the team.
I have hopes for my Guardians. I feel good about them. I always say, I always say, are the Guardians going to win the World Series? I always say, just get to the playoffs. That's the first step. Because if you just make the playoffs, then all bets are off, right?
That's right. Yep. I got to just get lucky for a few games.
Just make the playoffs, and then once you hit the playoffs, then World Series is in view. So, but I'm hoping that they'll be contending this year for that. I know you followed from your social media. You followed the World Cup. I have to confess, I can't get into soccer. I have tried.
Right.
And I just can't get into it. But it's really neat to see the world kind of coming together in some small way, right? To watch, because all my Facebook friends all over the world, they're posting on the World Cup. It's just great to see.
It's fun, and I think that's probably the most positive thing that sports does, is it gives people an ability to have community. And there's rivalries, but they're always it's a part of a friendly rivalry that makes it friendships fun. The World Cup, I think the first World Cup I paid attention to was back 1978. Argentina won that one, and I've watched them since. That final was one of the best games. I hear you. Actually, in terms of watching sports, I played soccer in college.
Okay.
It is my favorite sport to play. Never all that great at it, but it was the favorite sport to play. It's not my most favorite for spectator. I enjoy watching it, not as much as I do some other sports. But I think the challenge of soccer, for those who never played it and didn't grow up with it, it's sort of the field and ground thing in terms of looking at a diagram or a picture where you see what's in the forefront or what's in the background. People are often focusing, just watching the ball, where the ball is going. But the other side is where are the spaces and where are the people that are away from the ball and how are they moving and so on. And there's this dance that goes on for somebody who's really been involved with the game, has been a part of it all their life. That I just think most people who've not been a part of that game, that didn't play it, that haven't watched it, over the years, it just doesn't quite. It's just not as obvious to them what's happening. So it makes it less enjoyable, and I perfectly understand that. But it was fun. I really enjoyed the international.
That is cool. That is really cool to witness that. So anyway, well, Michael, so this is we probably bring this to a close, and so friends, we're glad that you have joined us, glad that you have watched us or listened to us in 2022, and we hope all of you have a wonderful new year and a blessed and productive, prosperous, calm, serene 2023, and we'll be back in January. So again, I'm with Michael Cruz, and I'm Allan Bevere, and this is Faith Seeking Understanding. And the patron saint of Faith Seeking Understanding University is Anselm of Canterbury, who said, "I don't understand in order to believe, but I believe in order to understand." So friends, keep seeking.
Peace to all.